Hey, what's going on? This is the Body Punch Podcast, and my name is Naz. Let's talk about UFC 287. UFC 287 featuring the MMA rematch between Alex Pereira and Stylebender. Much anticipated fight. They're coming back relatively quickly. And with all the news surrounding UFC, Endeavor, the WWE, I wanted to talk about UFC 287, the big ticket fight coming this weekend. What a fight this is going to be. The clash right before this one was amazing. Some people saw Stylebender winning the first round. It looked like he was about to get it until the round was over. And then Alex just came out of nowhere, round number 5, took out Stylebender and TKO'd him in the last round. It was a relatively close fight until Alex brought down that power and took out Stylebender. Stylebender reaching in the back pocket, using some of that wrestling. Let's talk about it. But before that, there's going to be a couple fights that I'm going to highlight in this card, including the co-main event at welterweight, Burns versus Masvidal. So the whole card seems super stacked. If we look at the early prelims, we got Cynthia Calvillo coming back, and it's going to be a big test for her. It's going to be a must-win fight for her, meaning that, she's been on somewhat of a skid. Been a little while since we've seen her, and this is a must-win situation for her. And then even on the prelims, we have names like Kelvin Gastelum and the karate hottie Michelle Waterson, Gomez. Don't want to forget that. But we got big names there. Super excited for Kelvin Gastelum. If we pinpoint one fight on the prelims, it's going to be that Kelvin Gastelum fight versus Chris Curtis. This is going to be a big one for me. I'm super high on Kelvin Gastelum every time I see him fight. Some people mention that, he's been pulling out of fights a lot recently. But this is going to be one of those ones that might be a highlight for Kelvin Gastelum, meaning that if he puts on a real big show against Chris Curtis, who's a tough opponent, and they're right next to each other, you can see that they're number 14 and number 15 respectively. And if Kelvin Gastelum can win this and win a couple more, and hey, let's say Alex wins this fight, man, we might have another title contender in Kelvin Gastelum. Put up a nasty fight against Israel Adesanya. We all remember that one. Classic. And it was one of Israel Adesanya's biggest tests that he defeated Kelvin Gastelum. You saw the face of Kelvin Gastelum. You saw the face of Israel Adesanya in that fight. It looked like they went through the blender. Their faces were all busted up. And on the main event spot, opening up the card, opening up the pay-per-view portion, we got Raul Rosas Jr., who is one of the youngest. I think he just turned 18 years old. And for his first fight, he put on real show. And let's see what he does against Christian Rodriguez. Then we got Kevin Holland versus Sergio Ponzinibbio. That's going to be a tough fight for Kevin Holland. Fan favorite Kevin Holland, who we saw take on Wonderboy last. We saw take on Hamza Chimaev in a last-minute replacement fight. Last-minute swap, actually. And that was a super tough fight for him. Got taken out really quickly. And then surprisingly, for many people, even though Kevin Holland has really great Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, decided to strike with Wonderboy Thompson, who's relatively old for the division, relatively old for the UFC, relatively old for MMA. And the one thing that he's really good at is striking. the karate champion, went against Kevin Holland, put on a tough test for him. And it's similar to what we saw with Anderson Silva. When Anderson Silva was able to strike against Israel Adesanya, who's at the top of the bill of this card, it looked like there were fighters that were in the same class, but it was just because they allowed Anderson Silva to do what he does best. That's what Kevin Holland did with Wonderboy Thompson. Hopefully he has a different game plan against Sergio Ponzinibbio, and it's going to be a super tough fight for him. We've seen, even if you do favors for the UFC, it can still nail you in the butt later on, meaning that loss against Khamzat Chimaev is going to play super big against him. Already starting fights behind stage against the co-main eventer, Jorge Masvidal. And obviously it's creating a lot of surge, creating a lot of hype, but it is another headache that the UFC does have to deal with. Third fight up in the main event, we got Rob Font coming back against Adrian Yanez in the bantamweight division. One of the toughest divisions in the UFC. Some would say it is the best division in the UFC. Rob Font, who is a big-time player, number 6 going against number 12. Big leap in competition for Adriana Yanez. And we'll see what happens. Because Rob Font is no easy out for anybody. Then we got the co-main event that I mentioned against, it's Gilbert Burns versus Jorge Masvidal. This is another one that Jorge Masvidal and Gilbert Burns have lost some, have won some, but they've all been against the top of the division in welterweight. Jorge Masvidal, just to think of some names off the top of your head, has fought Kamaru Usman twice. One time was a super short notice where he had to fly across the world and go to Abu Dhabi, make a pit stop in Greece, I believe, or Italy, grab a slice of pizza, and then go against the welterweight king at the time, Kamaru Usman. He also fought the likes of Kobe Covington, his ex-teammate, best friend, and, got wins against Ben Askren, that super crazy knockout flying knee, but and got wins against the likes of Nate Diaz for the BMF title. This is going to be a super test, because big test for Jorge Masvidal. Gilbert Burns is no easy fight for no one. We just recently saw him against Kamaru Usman. We did see him against Kamaru Usman in the past. Gave him a super difficult fight. But we also saw him against Khamzat Chimaev. Khamzat Chimaev was looking like a devastator at the time, still is. But Gilbert Burns went toe-to-toe with him and gave him the toughest test in his UFC career thus far. Gilbert Burns was on the precipice of taking out Khamzat Chimaev. Some people still think that Gilbert Burns won that fight. And now he's going to face Jorge Masvidal. Back against the wall, fighting in his home city of Miami for the first time in the UFC. In about 20 years, this is the first time the UFC's come back to Miami. And they're bringing a massive fight in the main event. So let's talk about it. Israel Adesanya taking on Alex Pereira. I want to talk about their last fight before we get into this fight. Last fight, we saw that 140 total strikes landed for Alex. 119 landed for Israel Adesanya out of 209. Alex Pereira threw about 214 total strikes. One apiece on the takedowns landed. One was attempted by Alex and one was made. Israel Adesanya attempted 4, landed one of those takedowns. And we're seeing in the video footage, and a lot of people talking about how Israel Adesanya might come back and bring that tough wrestling to this fight. No sub attempts. But I want to talk about significant strikes, which is where Alex is super dangerous. 57% of those 140 total strikes were significant. But Israel Adesanya, no slump. Like I said at the beginning of the podcast, it was a super close fight until it wasn't. Israel Adesanya, like I said, me included, I think he was winning that first round. And then all of a sudden, just those power shots of Alex were coming down the pipe and landing on Israel Adesanya. Israel Adesanya, 119 strikes, 53% of those strikes were significant. The way that Alex won was a TKO that was somewhat controversial. Some people claiming that it was an early stoppage in the first round. And I mean, let's see what happens in this fight. This is going to be a super tough fight. I feel like I've said that a million times in this podcast now. But this fight is going to be one of those ones that if Israel Adesanya is able to pull it together with that wrestling and take down Alex the one time he did in the fight, I mean, we saw what happened. We saw what happened, the way that Israel Adesanya was able to dominate in that position for that little while that they were there. And I was listening to a couple of podcasts and people are mentioning, and this really resonated with me, was the fact that Israel Adesanya is not worried about making a boring fight. Meaning that if this fight ends up being a wrestling bout between two strikers, which is going to be relatively boring, he's not worried about that. He wants to get the W. He wants to get his championship belt back. And that's all that Israel Adesanya can think of right now. We can see by some of the video footage that he's been putting out how emotional he might get after winning this belt back and how much it means to go up against a guy who has defeated him a couple times in kickboxing and now has already defeated him in mixed martial arts. This is the second time that Israel Adesanya has lost doing something big. The last time was going up to 205 and facing Jan Blachowicz and getting taken out by him there. And now going against Alex is going to be a super tough competition, but it's another way that Israel Adesanya is daring to be great. This is going to be a great fight in Miami. And co-main event, we went through everything. What a fun card. What a fun time to be a UFC fan. It's going to be a great one. So thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. And please like, subscribe, hit the bell notification, all that good stuff. If you're listening to it on the different podcast networks, please write a review. It really helps. Thank you again. This has been the Body Punch Podcast. My name is Naz. Bye.